It's November, the weather has well and truly turned, and the days are getting a bit bleak, but that doesn't mean that our plants have stopped growing. Mine are still pushing out lots of new stems and lots of new leaves, and that means there's always things to do. So in this video, I'm going to show you what's happening with my plants, the chores I'm doing and why. And first, I've got some orchids that I need to sort out. Your orchids may well have stopped flowering by now, and you might have ended up with two spent flower spikes like I have on this plant here. But if we cut them back, we should get secondary flowers. You can already start to see it here. There's a new spike just starting to emerge. So what you want to do is you want to find the top unopened node and cut just above there. Give it about 1 inch of space. So we can cut that off. All these nodes have had flowers growing out of it. So we can cut that off, discard that, and it'll focus its energy on now producing new flowers from these unopened nodes here. So when you've got two spikes like I have here, the pro tip is to cut one of the flower spikes lower than the other, like I'm going to do here. I'm going to cut that one just there, and that means that the orchid will now focus its energy on producing flowers on this spike. If you have them both at the same level, then you tend to get less vigorous regrowth of flowers. It may well be November, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to clone our plants. So I've got my Pothos Devil's Ivy here, climbing up this burlap moss pole that I recently purchased in my local hardware store. And as you can see, the stems have outgrown it. They're flopping over the side of the burlap moss pole. So normally with a moss pole, we can just continue to extend it. But in this case, with this burlap one, we can't. So that means what we should do is to prune them back. So you can grab your stem piece that is hanging over the side, and then just where you want to make the cut, near where the base of the plant is, just want to locate a leaf node. A leaf node is just where the leaf is growing out of the stem, and you want to cut just in front, like so. This looks like it's still attached to this burlap moss pole somewhere. Looks like the roots have grown into it, so I can cut that off. So that will, by cutting in front of the nodes, that will allow the existing stem to regrow a new stem basically. And then we're left with a piece like this, a long piece like this. But that isn't just one cutting. Each of these leaves can be its own cutting. It will develop roots. So all we need to do is to cut in between each of these leaf nodes. So that's a leaf node there and that's a leaf node there. So you can cut just in front of that one. The top piece we can root as well, so I'll put that to the side there. So we've now got this leaf node here where I've cut just in front, and I'm going to cut just behind, like so. So that is one cutting. So new roots will develop at the bottom of where we made the cut, and then when they develop roots, we'll pop them on, and then a new stem will grow there. So that is one cutting. I'll show you where to put them in a sec. So we can just go through, tidy up that stem piece there, and then cut, cut just behind that node. So that's another cutting there. So I've got two, and you can just continue to go through. Hopefully I won't drop these on the floor. So you want a fairly decent portion of stem just to allow it to develop roots properly. And that one just trim back a little bit. If there's an aerial root that's growing, then you can leave that on there. That will develop into part of the root system. The substrate you use to root is entirely up to you. I've got a glass of water here, so I'm just going to pop them in a glass of water. You can just put them straight into soil. They will grow roots in soil. Might be a bit slower. Or you can put them into perlite. Perlite's a good one. If you use a perlite prop box, then that will increase the humidity around the cuttings and they root dead quick. So I put them into this glass of water, and then it's just a case of putting that somewhere nice and bright and not too cold. Anything kind of above 15 degrees is a minimum really. But the main thing is making sure that the leaves get lots of light so that the stems will start to grow roots. Through the many years of looking after all my plants, I've come to realise, unfortunately, that Oxalis triangularis and my house aren't best friends. I've got one here living underneath this Sansi grow light here, and it's looking like a bit of a leggy mess, isn't it? All the petioles are stretching for the light, even though there's a Sansi light over it. So what I'm going to do with this, and it's something I do every year now for this plant, I'm going to force it into dormancy. So that basically means at the end of summer or autumn, as we are now in November, I'm going to pop that somewhere dark and cool. I'm not going to water it until spring basically, and all the leaves are going to die off. It's going to look like a right crispy mess, and then come spring I'm going to repot the plant basically, get the bulbs out, because these stems grow from bulbs in the soil, get them out, put them into new soil, and then a fresh flush of new growth is going to come through. And this plant always looks nice when it's growing nice and fresh, and then by the end of the growing season it tends to look a bit like a straggly mess. So I do force it into dormancy. I've got a video all about this that goes into much more detail that you can check out up here. Right, it's now time to channel your inner Jamie Oliver. Grab a lemon, chopping board and knife, and then some pruners, because after a long hard season of pruning our plants, especially the amount that I do, I'm always pruning and washing them after each pruning, they do tend to go a little bit rusty. Even though I've really tried my best to take care of these, they are a little bit rusty around the edges. And rusty pruners isn't good for our plants, not very healthy when we're cutting our plants with rusty pruners. So there's a homemade remedy to clear that, which involves a lemon in a bowl. So just cut your lemon in half, squeeze it into your bowl. This one's a bit of a tough lemon to get the juice out, I think, but it is quite juicy actually. So I reckon about the juice of half a lemon. You can go a little bit more if you've got large pruners or they're particularly rusty. And then you just want to get your table salt, regular salt, pour that into the lemon juice like so, and then give that a mix. I've forgotten my spoon, so I'll get that. Give that a mix in here. So the lemon juice is going to cut through the rust, and the salt is going to act as an abrasive basically. I'll give that a mix. You can get rid of the pips just to make your life a bit easier, but for the purposes of this, I'm not going to bother. So you want a bucket or something. Pop your pruners in and then just pour the solution over the pruners where the rust is. So I like to get my scrub daddy, which is a great invention, and just get in there and just scrub the rust off the pruners. So I'll do an initial scrub like this, just to get the mixture in all the nooks and crannies, like so. And then I'll leave it for about half an hour, something like that, for the lemon to really penetrate the rust. I'll come back, give it another scrub, and then the rust will be gone. And then you just want to give it a nice thorough rinse at the sink area under the water. And you should have nice clean pruners. You should never be afraid to prune your plants. They will always grow back, even in autumn and winter. As long as you've got normal indoor temperatures and you've got good enough light, they will continue growing. And if something's not growing how you want it, then it's a good idea to prune it away. And that's what's happening to this coleus plant. So, I don't know if you can see, but we've got the main plant here, which is this section, and then this one here is a stem that started to grow at the bottom, and it's becoming too dominant. I don't like that. I want this to be the main plant, to grow nice and strong. And I don't want that to be the main plant, because if that starts taking over, it's going to grow all the way over there and it's going to become a lopsided plant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it back like so. So that will now develop probably a couple of new stems. This one should now start to grow a bit more, hopefully, and this will now become the main part of the plant, which is exactly what I want. And for the bit that you cut off, you don't want to throw that away because it will develop roots. Pop that in water or even soil or perlite. Take off the lower leaves like this so they don't rot in the substrate that you choose. Take off those lower leaves, have about 4 leaves at the top. Pop that into water, it will grow roots dead quick. A coleus always grows dead quick. You'll have a fresh new plant. So the days are getting shorter in November, And that means that our plants do tend to suffer. So you might think having a load of your plants next to a nice big bay window like this in my dining room, this faces east, you might think that the plants will be perfectly fine here as the days start to get a bit shorter. But that's not necessarily the case. And it's why I recently purchased, within the last year or so, this magical device here. This is a light meter. So this will give me a steer on how much light certain areas in my home are getting. And it's been a real game changer because it does give me surprising results. This shelving unit here with a bunch of my plants, it's right next to this window, faces east in the mornings, the light comes shining through. It's morning at the moment as I'm filming this, although it is a cloudy day. But you might think, this is a nice bright spot, right? Well, not necessarily. When I turn it on and I shine it over here, or I put my light meter over here for the light to shine onto it, it's giving me a reading of about 200 foot candles, which is quite low. Really, plants need at least 400 to 500 foot candles for them to really thrive and push out lots of new stems and lots of new leaves. So this spot here isn't getting anywhere near 400 foot candles. This is low light spot, which you wouldn't necessarily think. So I highly recommend getting a light meter to add to your arsenal of tools along with your moisture meter to really tell you how your plants are doing in the certain spots in your home. So there are things that you can do to up the light when you've got a low reading like I have, and I'll show you in the other room. If you are really struggling for light in your home, particularly in winter, then I do recommend grow lights, of course. I always bang on about them on the channel. But to show you the power of a good grow light, I've got this croton that's been living under this grow light for a few months now. And you will notice that the lower leaves have a nice red tinge on the croton. That's what you want to see with a croton, red tint to the leaves. That's when the plant was growing in the greenhouse before I bought it. I brought it home, put it on my windowsill, and the leaves started to come out yellow and green. Not yellow in a bad way, just the tint of the leaves. And that means that the plant is not getting enough light, basically. But then, since moving it back underneath the grow light, or to the grow light, back underneath highlight, the leaves have started to go out red again. That's exactly what you want to see with a croton. So I highly recommend grow lights, and you can get a 25% discount off all Sansi lights with my link in the description. So do check it out. I've now put on the heating during the mornings and evenings to take the chill off because it is getting quite chilly here in Sheffield now, and that means that there's lots of dry air swirling around from the radiators. And to be honest, most of our plants do tend to do okay with that. They tend to grumble on during autumn and winter, but if you do have a couple of plants that are small enough and you do want to dote on them and they are suffering, then a good option would be to take a cloche or something similar and put something over the top to trap the humidity in. So don't really buy into buying humidifiers or adding pebble trays or things like that, because they don't really work, and misting plants. They don't really do much to increase the humidity sufficiently for our plants. But this will work. So I've got a little allocation here, a little small one that I'm trying to dote on because I've had it for a couple of years and it's remained this size. So I do have it under a grow light to prevent it from going dormant, and I want to increase the humidity around it to see if that works over winter. So you can take a cloche, would be good because it would be nice and wide with a little knob on top that you can pick it up with. But I've only got this clear vase basically until I buy a cloche. But this should fit over it carefully if I get that leaf up like that, like so. So that will now trap the humidity in, you'll see condensation, and the plant should start to thrive, fingers crossed. You do want to just lift it up every couple of days, something like that, just to get the air in, to avoid mold and stuff from developing. When you're watering your plants in autumn through winter, then you really want to avoid doing it like this. I've got my satin pothos here. I'm just spraying water all over the leaves, and I've also got my Fittonia here. You might be tempted, because it's a bushy plant, just to pour water over the top, and that's generally a bad idea. It's a bad idea all year, but especially in autumn and winter, because of the cooler temperatures, the leaves are going to take much longer to dry out, and when leaves stay wet, that's when you start to get mold and disease on your plant. So it's a really bad idea. So a much better way to do it is just to peel back the leaves and just water the soil, like so. So it can be tricky with certain plants like this Fittonia here, but If you just pull it back enough, don't have to be too gentle with it, and then just try and water the soil only. It's something I recommend all year long. After the long growing season of spring and then summer, our plants can end up looking a bit straggly, a bit of a straggly mess. And that's what's happening to this begonia, Rex begonia that I've got. It's looking quite stretched, quite leggy, lots of yellowing leaves as you can see, lots of crispiness at the base of the plant. Like that. And you might think that because it's autumn going into winter, that you can't prune your plants, you can't repot them, so you just have to leave them to just sit there and grin and bear it and don't do anything to them, but that's not necessarily the case. You can do all of those things and you can rehab your plant in winter because you don't want the plant to be sat there looking like a horrible mess. So we're going to sort out this guy now. And here she is. Obviously she's a lot smaller now, but she's looking much healthier. So what I did, I took cuttings of the mother plant and put them into soil to root. Begonias are quite easy to root, so I put them into soil to basically restart the plant. And it should do that even though we're heading into winter. It will grow roots, probably a bit slowly, but it will grow roots and new leaves will start to emerge in spring and we should have a nice bushy plant. So I've got it in my clear plastic pot so I can keep an eye on what's going on in terms of the roots, start to see the roots growing. And I've got it on this terracotta saucer because I haven't got a decorative pot for it, so I'm going to put it back on the shelf where it was and we'll check progress on this in future update videos. Unfortunately, pests are always ready and waiting to hitch a ride and go onto your plant and make a new home. It's particularly the case now that the heating is on. That dry air is the perfect environment for spider mites to start invading your plants. So you want to be extra vigilant in checking them over. So this is particularly the case for bushy specimens like this Pothos planter I have here. Lots of nooks and crannies for spider mites to kind of hide out and make a little home. So what I like to do is to grab a light, like the light on your mobile phone, and just go in and just see if you can see any very fine webbing or any specks moving around. So it will be quite hard to find, particularly the specks. But if you see very fine webbing where the leaf meets the petiole, then that might be spider mites. If it travels a long distance from, say, this leaf to this leaf, there's a big web there, then that's just going to be a house spider, not spider mites. It needs to be very concentrated in a very specific area. So just go in with your light and give it a good look over. This is where my Rex begonia was suffering, that I rehabbed. Next to it is a red flame begonia, I think that's what it's called. And as you can see, there is tons of crispy leaves, and this is absolutely perfect for spider mites and other pests to come and invade. So we want to make sure we go in and clear all these dead leaves. Okay, so I've got rid of most of the dying leaves. Let's open the plant out and it's going to make it much less hospitable for spider mites. I already mentioned the light meter earlier, and that's been a game changer in my house for me. But if you're a subscriber to the channel, then you'll know that my favourite device is the moisture meter. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And November, autumn and going into winter is when you'll really need your moisture meter, because plants may seem dry on top, but then you have no idea really how wet or how moist they are unless you go quite deep into the pot. So obviously the light is a lot less these days and the temperatures have gone down. So your plants aren't using as much energy as they were, and they're not drying out as quickly. So that can either mean that you're not watering enough because you completely stop watering entirely, which is the wrong thing to do. Or if you continue to water as you did in spring and summer, then you're going to run into problems. So you need to use your moisture meter. So this jade plant, in fact all of these plants, I've not watered for 2 weeks I think. So this jade plant feels nice and dry on top. But let's have a look inside. Go nice and deep. You want to go into the bottom half of the pot because that's where all the roots are going to be and where the moisture is going to be sat. And lo and behold, we are on moist on the moisture meter, reading 6. So that doesn't need a drink for probably another couple of weeks. And then we have my little monstera here that I grew from seed. So this feels very dry on top because it's in a nice chunky mix, chunky aroid mix. I'll stick my moisture meter in. If I can get it in because it's got a lot of roots in there. Ooh, it's nearly wet. Get this out. So it's reading, it is wet. It's reading 9 on the moisture meter. I only watered that 1.5 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So it feels dry on top, but it does look quite wet. I've got my clear plastic pot. There is condensation around the edges. So it's wet. So this doesn't need a drink for another week at least. So your moisture meter is going to save you bacon during November, autumn and winter. It might look like that I have the perfect collection of plants, but believe me, I don't. If you dig a little bit deeper, there are some nasties. For example, I've got this, what was once a green syngonium that's just living on that windowsill there, my east facing windowsill. And as you can see, it's got lots of yellowing crispy leaves. So I think I forgot to water it for about 3 or 4 weeks. And when I got to watering it, it was very dry, very light, light as a feather. So all the leaves, or a lot of the leaves, went by the wayside. And I think it probably is root bound as well. So there are lots of roots coming out of the drainage holes. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is root bound, but when there's this many roots coming out of the bottom, then the chances are that it might be. So I'm going to have a look at that and prune this back. There is new growth coming through, so there is life for this old dog yet. It just needs sorting out. So I wasn't root bound or anything like that. There was lots of roots at the bottom, but that's just where the moisture hangs out. The rest of it wasn't tied up in roots. So I've given it a good prune back. So I've just got the green leaves now. I'll pop that back where it was and hopefully it will grow much nicer now.